You don't just carry your father's eyes or your mother's smile. You carry their regrets, you carry their silence, you carry the life they never dared to live. Carl Jung once said something that, even today, echoes like a quiet scream in the soul of modern psychology. He said, "What usually has the strongest psychic effect on the child is the life which the parents have not lived. The part of their lives which might have been lived had not certain somewhat threadbare excuses prevented the parents from doing so." He wasn't talking about overt trauma or childhood abuse. He wasn't even referring to what your parents did. He was referring to what they didn't do, the roads they didn't walk, the passions they denied, the dreams they buried in favor of practicality, conformity, or duty. And yet, like a ghost, those unlived lives don't just disappear. They echo, they project, they seep into the unconscious of the child, not through words, but through energetic imprint, through mood, through invisible patterns of avoidance, guilt, shame, and unexpressed longing. This, Jung warned, is far more dangerous than we realize, because when a parent doesn't live their life fully, the child feels compelled, unconsciously, to carry what was left behind, not out of rebellion, but out of loyalty, out of love, and it often ruins them. You grow up in a household filled with tension you can't name. Your mother always looks out the window just a second too long. Your father walks with the gait of someone who wanted something more. You hear them talk about bills, about what could have been, about how you should make them proud. And in ways you can't fully understand, you begin building your identity not from your own desires, but from the aching gaps in theirs. You try to be the artist your father abandoned, the successful career woman your mother never dared to become, the free spirit, the performer, the rebel, the healer, not because it's your path, but because the residue of their unlived life has soaked into the soil of your being. And here's the terrifying part. You don't know it's happening. Jung believed that what is unconscious in the parent becomes fate in the child. So while your mother never admitted her longing for freedom, you end up fearing commitment. While your father buried his creative self, you find yourself obsessed with proving your worth in abstract ways. You're haunted by battles that never began in your lifetime, but still demand to be finished through you. Jung didn't blame parents for this entirely. He understood how society shapes self-denial. He even empathized with the fact that people have to make sacrifices. But what he couldn't accept, and what he called out with painful clarity, were the threadbare excuses. Excuses like, "I had to be responsible. It's too late now. I couldn't be selfish. No one in my family ever did that." These rationalizations sound reasonable. They even sound noble. But Jung saw through them. He knew that these are the masks we wear when we abandon the soul. And when a parent wears that mask for too long, they begin to subtly demand that their child validate it. "You should be grateful for everything I gave up for you. You better not waste your life. You'll understand when you're older." But the truth is, what the parent gave up was never for the child. It was out of fear. And what the child inherits is not love, but a legacy of guilt, a burden disguised as duty, a life shaped by compensating for someone else's silence. You might say, well, can't the child just go live their own life? In theory, yes, but Jung would argue, not so easily, because what is repressed in one generation becomes a haunting in the next. This is why so many people, especially those raised in emotionally repressive homes, feel a kind of invisible leash. They want to break free but feel inexplicable guilt. They want to pursue their true calling, but hear an inner voice whispering, "Who do you think you are?" They're not just fighting their own fears, they're fighting an inherited suppression. A psychic atmosphere passed down like an old coat that still smells like someone else. This is why families often repeat their patterns for generations. Jung called it enantiodromia, the tendency of the psyche to flip into its opposite when denied for too long. So the child who grew up with a passive, silenced mother might become a fiery rebel. Not because they're free, but because they're reacting. Or worse, they might marry someone just like her and try to fix the story from the outside. The unlived life of the parent becomes a repeating script, cast with new actors, until someone finally awakens. A child was never meant to carry the legacy of the unlived. They were meant to bloom into their own soul, to shape the world in ways only they could. But when a parent's unlived life festers, unspoken, unresolved, the child becomes something else. A vessel, a proxy, a secret altar upon which forgotten dreams are sacrificed one more time. You see it when a father insists his son become a doctor, not because he wants him to heal, but because he himself never could. You see it when a mother grooms her daughter to be poised and perfect, not for the child's sake, but to correct her own story of inadequacy. You see it when children are praised only for what the parent once desired, and criticized whenever they wander too far from that invisible script. This is not love. This is unconscious possession. Jung believed that parents who have not faced their own shadows inevitably project them onto their children. They try to live through the child, but what they're really doing is asking the child to solve their inner contradictions, a puzzle that was never theirs to begin with. And so the child grows up feeling conflicted. Loved, yes, but also used. Guided, yes, but also shackled. They sense a secret agenda behind every compliment, a quiet disappointment behind every choice. They begin to believe that their worth is tied not to who they are, but how well they fulfill the unlived blueprint of someone else. Not all neglect looks like abuse. Sometimes it looks like duty. The parents are there, they provide, they attend the plays, they pay the bills, but something is missing. A spark, a joy, a presence that only comes from someone who is deeply alive. Jung recognized this absence as far more damaging than most realize. When a child looks into their parents' eyes and sees exhaustion, regret, or bitterness, they begin to question life itself. If this is adulthood, the child thinks, why would I want it? If this is what love looks like, why would I seek it? If this is what success leads to, then what's the point? In this way, the unlived life of the parent subtly murders the imagination of the child, not with force, but with a kind of passive psychic erosion. The child becomes a psychological orphan, raised not by warmth and wisdom, but by duty and dysfunction. They learn how to survive, but not how to live. Jung didn't leave us in despair. He believed in liberation, but not the shallow kind. To him, the only way to escape the psychic inheritance of our parents is to undergo what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, apart from family roles, cultural masks, and unconscious projections. Individuation isn't rebellion, it's revelation. It's not about becoming the opposite of your parents. It's about becoming what they never could. Not to shame them, but to heal the ancestral line. You don't do it by blaming. You do it by seeing where their wounds shaped your foundation, by seeing the difference between love and projection, by seeing how much of your life has been spent proving something, rather than being something. This takes courage. It takes silence. It takes long walks alone and painful truths uncovered. But it is the only way to ensure that the ghosts of unlived lives do not pass, like whispers, into the future of your children. Because if you don't face it, you will repeat it. And the face of your regret may one day look like your son. There's a moment many people reach, around age 30, 40, sometimes later, when they realize, my parents were just people. Not gods, not villains. Just people. Scared, flawed, and shaped by a system that taught them to suppress their soul. And this realization can break your heart. Or it can break your chains. Because from this vantage point, you can finally forgive them. Not as a performance, but as a transformation. You don't need to repeat their silence. You don't need to fix their story. You only need to live yours, fully. In doing so, you offer a strange and beautiful kindness to your parents. You become what they couldn't. And love them anyway. This is how family curses are ended. Not through confrontation, but through awakening. There are moments in adulthood when you suddenly hear your parents' voices come out of your own mouth. A tone, a phrase, a reflex. It slips in unnoticed, almost automatic. And in those quiet seconds, you realize that not only did you inherit their features, you may have inherited their wounds too. Carl Jung didn't believe in simplistic psychological models. He understood that trauma doesn't always scream, it echoes, through behavior, through silence, through a sudden fear of doing something different, even when that different is what you truly desire. The unlived lives of parents do not remain buried. They crystallize in family dynamics. A mother who never pursued her passions subtly discourages risk. A father who buried his emotions grows cold when his son cries. None of it is intentional, but all of it is formative. And here lies the terrible paradox. Children adapt not just to what is said, but to what is avoided. The family's unspoken becomes the child's inner law. A child raised by a parent who abandoned their authenticity often becomes hyper-attuned to emotional undercurrents. They become the peacemakers, the achievers, the fixers, because they feel in ways they cannot articulate that their existence must fill a void. And they become very, very good at it. Too good. So good, in fact, that by the time they reach adulthood, they no longer remember what they actually wanted. They only remember how to keep the peace, how to maintain the mask, how to remain small enough to fit into the architecture of a family's suppressed history. This is the true tragedy of unlived lives. They do not die, they mutate, and they seek incarnation in the most innocent places, in the hearts of the next generation. Jung believed this inheritance could only be broken through awareness, through what he called the confrontation with the unconscious. And not the unconscious of dreams alone, but of family, culture, and myth. The great invisible machinery behind our everyday choices. To become conscious is not simply to know, it is to see the machinery moving through you and decide, with full presence, I will not let this pattern own me. But that is easier said than done, because every attempt at awakening feels like betrayal. The child who tries to live authentically may be accused of being selfish, of being difficult, of drifting too far from the way we do things. And the guilt that follows is not mild, it is ancestral. Yet this guilt, Jung would argue, is the price of freedom. Not freedom from family, but freedom within it, the kind of freedom that does not destroy but transforms. To awaken is not to abandon. It is to risk being seen as different. It is to step out of the emotional contracts you never signed but always felt obliged to honor. It is to ask, who am I when I stop being what my parents needed me to be? And that question, terrifying and sacred, is the beginning of soul. When we begin to answer it, even imperfectly, something incredible happens. We start to experience compassion, not just for ourselves, but for our parents too. Because we begin to see their youth, their own impossible choices, their fears, their frozen dreams. We see the moments where they, too, wanted more but didn't know how to reach for it. And in those moments of clarity, blame softens into understanding. You stop needing them to apologize. You start understanding that their silence was a language they didn't know how to translate, that their restrictions were the only way they knew how to love, that their unlived life wasn't a punishment they gave you. It was a wound they never learned to heal. And with that, a new truth dawns. You can't change the past, but you can refuse to repeat it. You can grieve the childhood you didn't have, and still build a life that your own child, whether real or metaphorical, will not have to recover from. You can carry their story without reenacting it. To do that, though, you must begin the sacred rebellion of becoming fully yourself. Not out of defiance, but devotion. Not to prove them wrong, but to live out the unlived. In your way, not theirs. That is individuation. That is healing. That is what Jung meant when he said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." Because when we do not bear that burden blindly, when we choose to see it, name it, and transform it, we become what every lineage longs for, the first to wake up. There is a quiet moment, often late in the night, when you finally sit with yourself and realize you've been living two lives, yours and the one your parents never got to live. The subtle hesitation before making a bold choice, the discomfort when expressing joy too loudly, the invisible guilt of succeeding where they failed. These are not quirks, they are echoes. Carl Jung didn't write his warnings to condemn parents. He wrote them because he saw a pattern. He saw how deeply unconscious life ripples forward, how the silence of one generation becomes the confusion of the next. And he saw the solution not in blame, but in light. You are not here to carry your family's ghosts forever. You are here to help them cross over. And to do that, you must risk becoming what they never dared to be. Whole. Jung believed that real healing requires descent, not just into your personal memories, but into the underworld of generational wounds. To confront them, to name them, to love what was unloved. Only then can you return, with fire. This is not a glamorous path. Individuation, as Jung called it, is not the same as independence. It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is the reclamation of your original face, the one you had before the world told you who to be. And what you'll find, strangely enough, is that the more you become yourself, the more love you begin to feel, even toward the ones who wounded you. Because now, finally, you see clearly. They didn't mean to harm you. They were repeating what was done to them. They were afraid. They were unfinished. And so are you. But you are becoming. The greatest tragedy is not when a life is unlived. The greatest tragedy is when that life is inherited unexamined. And Jung's warning was not just about what happens if we ignore this. It was about what becomes possible when we listen. You begin to parent yourself. You begin to protect the inner child who waited decades to be seen. You begin to live the life that your bloodline was too afraid to claim. And in doing so, you end the war. You become the bridge between what was and what could be. You stop being a mirror of your parents' fears and become a lighthouse for the next soul who enters this world through you or beside you. That is what the world needs now. Not more blame. Not more trauma passed around like family heirlooms, but people willing to say, "It ends with me." That is the new legacy. That is the miracle of consciousness Jung dedicated his life to uncovering, and now it's in your hands. Because the question is no longer, what did my parents fail to live? The question is, what will I finally live for? And in that question is your freedom.